ever listened to any of these classic and contemporary Filipino songs? Well, I am very sure if not all of them, but most of these songs are very familiar to you. And I think you have been jamming onto these songs up until now because they were considered as iconic and massive hits during their time. And I think up until now, most of these songs are played in loudspeakers, in radio, or in buses and jeepneys, or you often hear this sang in karaoke bars, and also you often hear this from your neighbors every Sunday. So they are pretty much popular because of the lyrics or the meaningful lyrics that these songs have presented to the media, which many of you have related to it. But has it ever crossed your mind, or have you ever thought of what could have influenced the writers or the composers of these songs into crafting these meaningful lyrics into one music composition? Or pertaining to literature, I know most of you have been reading a lot of stories and literary pieces which are very relatable. And have you ever thought of what are the influences or what are actually the inspirations of the writers into creating such relatable stories and literature? So in our lesson in this video, we are going to talk about, or we are going to appreciate more of the literary texts and songs, and we are going to identify what inspired the writers into creating them. So what are we waiting for? Let's get into the video.
After going through this lesson, you are expected to identify words, ideas, structure, and purpose of the text. Second, explore the different social and socio-cultural contexts to enhance and enrich the understanding of the text. And lastly, to appreciate the importance of understanding the literary context and its meaning to one's own life experiences.
So before we get into the main topic of our lesson video today, so a little bit of trivia before we start. So, all of you, of course, know this very popular novel written by our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, you know, entitled Noli Me Tangere. So, you have read and you have studied this novel when you were in your junior high school. And of course, this novel presented the lives of the early Filipinos during the Spanish colonization period. So, as a trivia, it was actually influenced by an American novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who happened to be read by our national hero when he was studying abroad. So, this novel is actually entitled Uncle Tom's Cabin. So, this novel basically discussed the lives of the African Americans as slaves in the United States before. So after reading this novel, Rizal became very inspired, and Rizal was influenced by this technique written by Stowe, and that becomes the birth of Noli Me Tangere. So technically speaking, Noli Me Tangere talks about the lives of the early Filipinos in the hands of the Spanish friars and how the government was controlled during the Spanish period. So, aside from this novel, or this foreign novel that influenced Noli Me Tangere, so the lives of the early Filipinos before, or the experiences of the early Filipinos, also inspired Dr. Jose Rizal in writing the novel. So definitely the historical events and also the current state of our country during those times are the ultimate inspirations that contribute to the creation and to the beauty of the novel. So that's when we are going to talk about literary context.
What is context? Context, in its simplest definition in literature, refers to the background information that surrounds the text itself. It also involves the following information. First is the environment setting. Second is the surrounding of events. And lastly, the occurrences that happen or that occur outside of the text. Now, from simply just understanding the text after reading it, we are going into the context. So, when we say context, we are now getting out of the text itself, which leads to a deeper understanding and appreciation of the text. The purpose of identifying the context of a literary work is to enable the readers to understand the narrative or a literary piece more. This also involves, on the part of the writers, to provide information, new concepts, and words to develop thoughts surrounding the text that the writer plans to write. There are four types of literary context. The first one is the writer's context. Before we get into the meaning of the writer's context, I have here a simple question for you, and I would like you to answer it by yes or no within yourself. Do the lives of the authors influence their writings? Definitely, the answer is yes. If you could still remember, I asked you to create your own ambahan 2 weeks ago, and most of you wrote your ambahan, narrating your own experiences, narrating your own emotions and feelings of a certain topic or a certain theme. That means you, as the author, influence your own writing. This is when the writer's context comes in. This involves knowing about the writer's life, values, assumptions, gender, race, sexual orientation, and the political and economic issues related to the author that may have influenced his or her writing. You have to answer the following questions in order to identify the writer's context. First is who is the author or the writer of the text? Second is what is his or her educational background? Third, what are his or her personal information? And lastly, how do the above information affect or influence the text written by the author? Basically, you are going to identify the different information surrounding the writer, and you have to link these information to the text that he or she has written, and you are going to find out how the life of the writer affects his writing. Now let us move on to the second type of context, and we call it the reader's context. If earlier we are going to identify the life of the writer, which falls under the writer's context, in the reader's context, we are now getting away from the writer's life, but now we are going to focus on the reader itself, or the reader himself or herself. The reader's context involves the reader's previous reading experience, values, assumptions, political, and economic issues. These are the questions that you need to answer if you are going to identify the reader's context. First is, what are your prior experiences as the reader related to the text? And what is your impression of the text? Basically, this involves the previous literary texts that you've read, and how are you going to relate it to the present text that you currently read. And at the same time, you are going to touch your own experiences, your own feelings and emotions, and how do these experiences relate to the text you are reading. Third context is the text's context. This now involves the work's publishing history. It is part of the larger text, such as the newspaper, history, events translated in it. So, in identifying the text's context, these are the questions that you need to answer. First is, where was the text published, which refers to the place of the publishing company where the text was published, followed by what year or what period was it published. Third, what publishing company printed the text. You are now going to identify the background information of the company or of the publishing company that printed the text. And lastly, we have the social context or the socio-cultural context surrounding the text. This involves and this or these feature the society in which the characters live and in which the author's text was produced. So in this context, we are going to take note of the two factors. First is we are going to identify the society of the characters in the text, and also the society or the kind of society that the author of the text lived in when the text was produced. Basically, these are the questions that you need to answer. First is, what kind of society emerged during the time when the literature was created? And lastly, or the last question, what type of government or significant historical event happened during its publication? Okay, so to sum everything up, we have the writer's and the reader's context together with the text's context, and the social and sociocultural context are all equivalent to the deeper understanding of the text.
Now that you have already realized or that you have already learned the importance or the significance of literary context in understanding and in appreciating more a literary text, now it's your time to conduct your own investigation or your own research of these different literary songs.
For your activity, deadline is on November 25. You have to listen to the following songs and choose only one. Identify the different context of the following OPM songs by answering the different questions in each context. Then, explain how the text's context affect the overall meaning and impact of the song. So, you have to choose from the following. The first is Ang Huling El Bimbo by the Eraserheads. Second is Upuan by Glock 9. Third is Anak by Freddie Aguilar. Next is Ikaw by Yeng Constantino. And lastly, Walang Natira by Glock 9 featuring Shell Belmonte. You just need to choose one from all of these songs. Please visit your Google Classroom for further instructions. You do not necessarily have to finish everything today because this will be submitted next week. Good luck and enjoy.
So thank you so much for listening to our lesson video, and I hope you'll have fun creating your own literary analysis. So see you and have a great day. Bye!